This next incident is with Miss Dunne, the secretary of Blazes Boylan. She is in his office and he is phoning her from the fruit shop, remember? So we'll see that side of the conversation, her side. And it's interesting that we get an interior look at her consciousness. We don't see much of that of other characters besides Bloom and Stephen and Molly. Like the other streams of consciousness, there is definitely a contrast between her interior monologue and the way that she speaks to Blazes Boylan. I think she is also a good candidate for the Martha character that Bloom is corresponding with, that like his Henry Flower character, Martha is a pseudonym or pen name for some character in the book. Some people suggest the nurse later in the book, but I think Miss Dunne is actually a really good candidate. She's very daydreamy, thinking about this Wilkie Collins novel and maybe trying to meet up with a beau that night. And she just seems like she can type too, so that's another key point. Miss Dunne also confirms the date if we didn't realize it was June 16th, 1904 when she is typing. So that is just, I think, Joyce hammering it home that this is taking place and this is what Bloomsday is. We also learn about the tour that Boylan is planning with Molly to go to Belfast and Liverpool. And another key point that will lead into the next episode, Sirens, Lenehan is looking for Boylan, so they have agreed to meet at the Ormond Hotel at 4 p.m. This is the time of his appointment with Molly, you may remember, so Boylan is going to be cutting it a bit close and have to go straight from the hotel to Molly's. Intrusions in this episode: the disc shot down the groove, wobbled a while, ceased and ogled them, 6. There is absolutely no way to make sense of this the first time you read it. We'll see it in 2 sections from this one. We'll talk about it a bit more. And then the other intrusion:
5 tall white-hatted sandwichmen between Monopoly's corner and the slab where Wolfe-Tone's statue was not, eeled themselves, turning HELYs and plodded back as they had come.
5 men walking around with the HELYS signs advertising Healy's Wisdom Healy's. This next section begins in a particularly confusing way, talking about this singer Crotty and these neighborhoods. What are they called? Ringabella and Crosshaven. Don't worry too much about them. They are not incredibly important points as far as I can tell, but they are confusing. So the location where we're at is this warehouse where Ned Lambert works. But it has not always been a warehouse. Back in the 10th century, it was an abbey, St. Mary's Abbey, and it has history. This guy, Silken Thomas, who was a rebel against the English. So all kinds of history is involved here. Aside from Ned Lambert, another character there is J.J. O'Malloy. He is a lawyer who is not doing very well financially. He's trying to borrow some money. And then there's a new character, Hugh C. Love. He is researching this book. He is writing this history book about the Fitzgeralds. That guy, Silken Thomas, I mentioned, he was a Fitzgerald. And then after he leaves, the other 2 characters, Ned Lambert and J.J. O'Malloy, they talk for a few minutes. Just kind of some backstory and a little joking. 2 intrusions in this section: from a long face, a beard and gaze hung on a chessboard. This is Parnell, his brother. Remember, Parnell is dead. He's that politician that was kind of up and coming and seemed like he would have a good chance for helping Irish to gain more independence from England. But Parnell's brother is playing chess, but we haven't seen that section yet. And then the other intrusion is the young woman with slow care detached from her light skirt, a clinging twig. This is that couple that John Comey saw in the first section. We'll see them yet again before we're done. Section 9 has Tom Rochford, who we saw in Lestrygonians, getting a drink at the bar. This is a bit confusing because they're talking about this invention that Tom Rochford has, and I think I understand it, but let me try and explain it. So vaudeville shows were shows kind of like theater, but unlike theater nowadays where you have a set time for a program to begin, they would just run kind of continuously. People would pay and go in. That's my understanding. I don't claim to be an expert on vaudeville shows, but the invention would tell you, like if they gave you a program saying these people are going to be performing, and you walked in the middle of a show, you wouldn't know who's performing, where you're at. So the performance would have kind of like this machine that would display who is performing at a particular time. That is my understanding of the invention. I could be 100% wrong, but that is what I get from this episode. Anyway, Tom Rochford is showing or explaining this invention to Lenehan and M'Coy and Nosey Flynn, and Lenehan says that he will bring this device to the attention of Blazes Boylan. Boylan, remember, is the concert manager. He works in theaters. He knows theater people, so he might be the one to explain that to you. This is why Lenehan is going to be meeting Boylan and to discuss a few other things at the Ormond bar at 4 o'clock. M'Coy and Lenehan leave and start walking, and as they're walking, they discuss Tom Rochford. We learn how he is sort of considered a hero in the community because some guy was in the sewer, kind of, I don't know what was going on. He was somehow injured or hurt in the sewer, and Tom Rochford went down and saved his life somehow. So he's considered a hero. Lenehan also discusses the horse race that we've kind of been following throughout the day. His preference, who he wants to bet on, is Scepter. They ask who's riding the horse Scepter, and the answer is O'Madden. And I think don't confuse this with O'Madden Burke, the journalist that we've mentioned earlier in the book. I think this is, again, one more of those tricky names that Joyce is trying to throw in to confuse you. They also mention the quote-unquote tip that Bloom unknowingly gave to Bantam Lyons that morning. Remember, he's like giving him the newspaper. He says, I was just going to throw it away. And Bantam Lyons thought he meant throw away the horse. Coincidentally, remember, this is a book about coincidences. Just as they are discussing Bloom, they see him. He's looking at the books for a book for Molly. What they discuss about Bloom is how he is good at finding bargains. And this is a bit ironic since the tip for throwaway is a bargain that he has also found, but they don't seem to realize that. Seeing Bloom also reminds Lenehan of the story, so he tells M'Coy the story about one night he was in a carriage with Bloom, Molly, Leopold Bloom, Molly Bloom, Chris Callanan, I believe the guy's name is. They were pretty drunk heading home, and while Bloom was talking with Chris Callanan, showing him the stars, pointing out constellations or something, Molly was sitting next to Lenehan, and as the carriage was bumping along, apparently Lenehan either kind of groped her or felt her or rubbed against her somehow in a very sexual way that she seemed to be okay with. So while Bloom was totally oblivious to it. It's kind of hard to say how M'Coy takes the story if he's kind of not totally cool with the way that Lenehan behaves. It's kind of ambiguous. Joyce says, M'Coy's white face smiled about it at instants and grew grave. There's a touch of the artist about old Bloom. Kind of a random idea I had as I was reading this. When Lenehan says goodbye, he goes tooraloo, and it made me think of Corny Kelleher's phrase, with my tooraloom, tooraloom, tooraloom. Could this be, and this is total conjecture, I need to read the text, the entire book again more thoroughly to kind of see if this idea holds any water, but could Lenehan and could Joyce be indicating that Lenehan is also a police informant? I was thinking, what does Lenehan do? He's just kind of like this gambler type who doesn't really do much. He just kind of wafts around. I could see him being a police informant. He doesn't do too much, and he seems to interact with a wide variety of people. The first intrusion in this section Lawyers of the past, haughty, pleading, beheld pass from the consolidated taxing office to Nisi Prius Court, Richie Golding carrying the cost bag of Golding, Colas, and Ward, and heard rustling from the Admiralty Division of King's Bench to the Court of Appeal an elderly female with false teeth smiling incredulously and a black silk skirt of great amplitude. It ties in with this paragraph in the next section. An elderly female, no more young, left the building of the courts of Chancery, King's Bench, Exchequer and Common Pleas, having heard in the Lord Chancellor's Court the case in lunacy of Potterton, in the Admiralty Division the summons, ex parte motion, of the owners of the Lady Cairns versus the owners of the barque Mona, in the Court of Appeal reservation of judgment, in the case of Harvey versus the Ocean Accident and Guarantee Corporation. That was quite a sentence. This seems to be another not too relevant incident that is again on the edge of our vision, that is not really directly related to our story, but it is clearly a major story in its own right that we're not going to get the details of. This mentioning, though, of the law firm Golding, Colas, and Ward, the thing to note is that Golding is the uncle, Richie Golding is the uncle of Stephen. You may have remembered that, but he will meet with Bloom, he will run into Bloom, and they will have a bite to eat at the Ormond Hotel in the next episode, Sirens. Other intrusions. The gates of the drive opened wide to give egress to the viceregal cavalcade. This is a detail from the final section of Wandering Rocks that we'll look at later. Another intrusion. Master Patrick Aloysius Dignam came out of Mangans, late Fehrenbachs, carrying 1.5 pounds of pork steaks. This is Paddy Dignam's son, and we'll see him near the end of Wandering Rocks as well, coming home from the butcher. And then another intrusion. A card, Unfurnished Apartments, reappeared on the window sash of number 7 Eccles Street. This is Molly Bloom adjusting the sign of the unfurnished apartment at their address. Section 10 is a brief look at Bloom, very short incident where he's at the bookseller picking a book for Molly, and he settles on this kind of soft porn erotica novel called Sweets of Sin, and we get a look inside the books too. I think this is another example of Joyce intruding these voices, Joyce's voices, and we also get a humorous description of the grossness of the bookseller. Next, we cut back to the auction rooms where, remember, Dilly Dedalus is waiting for the father, Simon Dedalus. And when he comes out, we get a picture of Simon's at his most vicious and mean. The snarky conversation between them, you can see that there's a little love lost between them, that there's a lot of bitterness and anger between them. She's trying to get some money from Simon. She's been waiting for hours, and Simon refers to the daughters as an insolent pack of little bitches. Dilly does get a small amount of money, and then she goes home saying that she'll see him later. And Simon, at this point in the book, seems pretty mowed down by life, and this guy outside the auction rooms is ringing this bell, and it seems to just kind of drill into Simon's brain, like make it even worse. Intrusions in this section. Bang of the last lap bell spurred the half-mile wheelmen to their sprint. J.A. Jackson, W.E. Wiley, A. Monroe, and H.T. Gahan, their stretched necks wagging, negotiated the curve by the college library. This is apparently a real bicycle race that happened that day. I'm guessing this is one of those things that Joyce just kind of picked up from a newspaper, maybe a newspaper from that day, and took these names and inserted them in. And another intrusion. Mr. Kiernan, pleased with the order he had booked, walked boldly along James's Street. This is Tom Kiernan, the subject of the next section in Wandering Rocks. And then finally, the viceregal cavalcade passed, greeted by obsequious policemen out of Park Gate. And this again is the cavalcade in the final section that we'll see in Wandering Rocks.